Have you ever slept through the entire night, only to wake up feeling like you never slept at all? That was exactly how Margaret felt on this quiet spring morning. The sun rose just as it always did. Soft light filled her bedroom. Birds sang outside her window. Nothing around her had changed. But her body felt unusually heavy. She wasn't in pain. She wasn't sick. She had simply woken up, already exhausted. Margaret sat quietly on the edge of her bed. She waited for that familiar feeling, when her body would slowly wake up. It never came. She walked into the kitchen, poured herself a cup of coffee, wrapped both hands around the warm mug. For years, coffee had been enough. It cleared the morning fog. It gave her energy. Today, it changed nothing. Later that morning, Emily stopped by before work. She smiled as she walked into the kitchen. Then she paused. "Grandma, you look tired." Margaret smiled gently. "I slept all night. I just don't understand why I still feel this way." Emily nodded. She thought she already knew the answer. Maybe Grandma just hadn't slept well. It sounded reasonable. But both of them were about to discover that the real answer was very different. The next afternoon, Margaret decided to visit Dr. Carter. She expected another conversation about sleep. Instead, he greeted her with a question she had never heard before. He smiled warmly, looked at Margaret, then quietly asked, "Margaret, do you wake up tired? Or do you wake up already exhausted?" Margaret looked at Dr. Carter for a moment. She wasn't sure she understood the question. "I thought those meant the same thing." Dr. Carter smiled gently. "Most people do." He leaned forward slightly. "Sleeping all night and recovering all night are not always the same thing." Margaret frowned thoughtfully. "If I'm sleeping, shouldn't my body be recovering too?" Dr. Carter reached for his phone. "Imagine this battery. You plug it in every night. It stays connected for 8 hours. But the charger is damaged. When morning comes, the phone was connected, but it still isn't fully charged." He looked back at Margaret. "Sometimes, our bodies experience something very similar." Dr. Carter picked up a small notepad. He drew 2 simple circles. One was labeled sleep. The other was labeled recovery. "They overlap," he said. "But they are not identical. You can spend enough time asleep without giving your muscles, your brain, and your nervous system everything they need to recover." Emily looked surprised. She had never thought about sleep that way. Dr. Carter folded the notepad. Then he smiled kindly. "Margaret, you are far from alone. I hear this story almost every single day. People tell me, 'Doctor, I slept all night. So why do I still feel exhausted?'" Margaret slowly nodded. For the first time, she no longer felt confused. She felt curious. If sleep wasn't the whole answer, what had her body been missing all along? Dr. Carter folded his hands on the desk. "Margaret, when we fall asleep, our bodies don't simply switch off. In many ways, they begin one of the busiest parts of the day. Your heart keeps working. Your brain organizes memories. Your immune system repairs damaged cells. And your muscles begin rebuilding themselves." Margaret looked surprised. "I thought sleeping meant resting." Dr. Carter smiled. "It does. But it also means rebuilding. Think of your muscles as a small repair crew. They work hardest while you sleep. Every day, they repair tiny amounts of wear and tear. They rebuild strength. They prepare you for tomorrow. But as we grow older, this repair process becomes slower. Not because your body gives up, but because it needs more support than it once did. Dr. Carter picked up his pen once again. Imagine you're building a small brick wall. You have skilled workers. You have plenty of time. But there are no bricks. The workers want to rebuild. They simply don't have the materials. He looked gently at Margaret. Our muscles work the same way. If they don't receive enough protein, their repair work becomes slower. Emily slowly nodded. That actually makes sense. Margaret leaned back quietly. For years, she believed the answer was simple. If I'm tired, I should sleep more. Dr. Carter gently shook his head. Sometimes, the answer isn't more sleep. It's better recovery. Margaret smiled softly. For the first time, she stopped asking, "Why am I sleeping so much?" and started asking, "What does my body need to recover better?" Dr. Carter smiled gently. Margaret, most people think sleep alone rebuilds the body. But sleep can only do part of the work. He reached for a small notebook. If your body doesn't receive enough protein during the day, your muscles have fewer building blocks to work with overnight. It's a little like asking a carpenter to build a table without giving him any wood. Margaret slowly nodded. So my body wanted to repair itself. But sometimes it didn't have everything it needed? Exactly. Dr. Carter continued. Our muscles are remarkably practical. They pay attention to how often we use them. If a muscle is needed, the body works to maintain it. But when a muscle is used less and less, the body quietly begins saving energy. Emily looked thoughtful. So even small movements matter? Dr. Carter smiled. Sometimes, the smallest movements send the biggest message. Margaret sat quietly for a long moment. She had expected complicated answers. Instead, she discovered 3 surprisingly simple ideas. Give the body the materials it needs. Keep the muscles involved in everyday life. And welcome the morning, instead of hiding from it. None of them sounded dramatic. None of them promised miracles. But together, they gave Margaret something she hadn't felt in weeks. Hope. As they walked toward the parking lot, Emily looked at her grandmother and smiled. So, what's the plan? Margaret laughed softly. For once, I'm not going to chase more sleep. I'm going to help my body recover better. Emily nodded. It wasn't a dramatic decision. It was simply the beginning of something new. The next morning, Margaret made one simple change. Instead of rushing through breakfast, she gave it a little more attention. A boiled egg, a bowl of Greek yogurt, fresh berries, whole grain toast. Nothing expensive, nothing complicated. Just a meal that gave her body a better chance to rebuild. After breakfast, Margaret stayed outside just a little longer. She watered her roses, walked slowly along the garden path, paused to stretch her shoulders. 5 extra minutes. That was all. Her body wasn't counting steps. It was simply receiving a gentle reminder. We're still using these muscles. The next morning, Margaret opened her eyes. For just a moment, she waited. Did she suddenly feel energetic? No. She still felt tired. But this time, she wasn't discouraged. Dr. Carter had warned her. The body doesn't rebuild overnight. It responds to consistency. Margaret smiled softly. Then she got out of bed. and began another day. Day after day, Margaret repeated the same simple habits. A better breakfast, a little more morning sunlight, a little more movement, a little more water. Nothing about her life looked dramatic. Yet something inside her was slowly beginning to change. A few days later, Emily stopped by again. Margaret opened the front door before Emily had a chance to knock. Emily laughed. "You're getting faster." Margaret looked surprised. "Am I?" Emily nodded. "And you don't look as tired." Margaret hadn't noticed. She had been paying attention to every small effort, not every small result. That weekend, Margaret returned from the grocery store. She picked up 2 grocery bags, walked toward the front porch. Halfway up the steps, she suddenly stopped. Not because she was tired, because she had just realized something. She hadn't needed to stop and rest. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No one applauded. No music played. But Margaret quietly smiled. Sometimes, the smallest victories are the ones that change us the most. 1 week passed. The seasons hadn't changed. Margaret hadn't lost 20 pounds. She hadn't discovered endless energy. Life still looked beautifully ordinary. But on this quiet morning, something felt different. Margaret opened her eyes. She lay still for a moment. Then she smiled. For the first time in a long while, she didn't wake up wondering how she would get through the day. It wasn't that Margaret suddenly had more energy. She simply stopped spending so much of it fighting her own body. She understood what her body needed. She respected its pace. She supported its recovery. And somehow, that made every morning feel a little lighter. Emily noticed it almost immediately. Grandma was already in the kitchen. Coffee was ready. Breakfast was waiting. Emily smiled. "You've been awake for a while." Margaret laughed. "I didn't keep hitting the snooze button today." Neither of them mentioned protein, or sunlight, or muscles. They simply enjoyed breakfast together. Later that morning, Margaret took her usual walk. The distance hadn't changed. The neighborhood hadn't changed. Even the birds sounded the same. The only thing that had changed was how she felt inside. Recovery no longer seemed impossible. Felt achievable. One small choice. One ordinary morning at a time. That evening, Margaret sat quietly on her front porch. A warm cup of tea rested beside her. An old notebook lay open on her lap. She looked back over the past week. Nothing extraordinary had happened. No miracle. No overnight transformation. Just a few small choices, repeated with patience. She smiled. Sometimes, the quietest changes become the strongest ones. Margaret picked up her pen. Then she wrote 3 simple reminders. First, my body wasn't asking for perfection. It was asking for support. Second, small habits matter more than perfect days. And third, it's never too late to help your body recover a little better. Margaret realized something else. None of these small changes were random. Each one quietly helped her body recover the way it was designed to. A nourishing breakfast gave her muscles something to rebuild with. Morning light helped her body welcome a new day. Gentle movement reminded her muscles they were still needed. Science hadn't complicated her life. It had simply explained it. Before going inside, Margaret closed her notebook. She looked across her garden, then quietly whispered to herself, "Tomorrow morning, I'll begin again." Not because she had to, because she finally understood that every sunrise offered another chance to care for the body that had carried her through an entire lifetime. The following morning, Margaret opened her eyes once again. The room looked exactly the same. The sunlight felt exactly the same. Even the birds outside sounded familiar. But inside, something had quietly changed. She no longer feared the morning. She welcomed it. Recovery doesn't always begin with a prescription. Sometimes it begins with understanding. Understanding what your body has been quietly asking for. A little more nourishment. A little more movement. A little more morning light. And above all, a little more patience. If Margaret's story reminded you of someone you love, perhaps a parent, a grandparent, or maybe even yourself, share this story with them. Sometimes, the smallest conversation can become the beginning of a healthier tomorrow. And if you'd like to continue walking this journey with Margaret, we'd be honored to see you again. Before Margaret left the clinic that week, Dr. Carter smiled and said one last thing. Margaret, we've helped your mornings. But there's another change after 70. That quietly steals independence from millions of older adults. Margaret looked at him with curiosity. So, what is it? Dr. Carter simply smiled. We'll talk about that next time.